Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made this birthday card using the Delicate Dreams Sweet Collection that's going to be coming out in the March 2026 online exclusives from Stampin' Up. I'm first going to show you the products I'm going to be using. This is the stamp set. If you missed it, I did do a kind of a show and tell video showing you what all is in this sweet collection in more detail, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this today. I didn't use the stamps for this particular card. I did, however, use the coordinating dies. I used quite a few of those, so I'll show you which ones in just a minute. And then out of the Designer Series paper pack, these are the 4 papers that I used. Kind of this crumb cake that looks more like a linen, this Secret Sea with the little bronze flowers on it, this other crumb cake piece that is it's crumb cake in the background and then the white foliage on the front. I was going to use this side, which I love as well, and I'll show you that kind of as we start putting the card together. But I flipped it over and ended up liking how this looked, so I used this side. And then this piece of Designer Series paper where you can actually use the dies to cut out some of these flowers. And you can see I've already used a little section of it. So those are the 4 Designer Series papers that we'll use for this card today. And before we start doing our die cutting, I am going to show you the last few things that you're going to need if you want to follow along with this particular card. I am using out of the Boardwalk Fun stamp set. This is another new set. I'm using the Happy Birthday. I just really liked how it had the script, the 2 different fonts together. So I'll be using just the Happy Birthday out of that. Of course, you could use any sentiment that you want for this card. And then I am also using the Beautifully Celebrated dies. This was in the new mini catalog, the January through April mini catalog this year, 2026. I love this die set, the shapes, so I'll be using a couple of those. If you saw my show and tell video, I talked about how I really feel like the Pecan Pie, even though it's not part of this collection, I think this really coordinates nicely with the bronze. So I'll be using that for my sentiment. I like how this metallic enamel effects in copper looks with the bronze, so I'm using this for a little bit of embellishment. And then a non-Stampin' Up! Product that I'm going to use is the Distress Mica Spray. This is in antiqued bronze. I'll show you how I use this once we get to that part. It's just a teeny little spray I'm going to use, so you can totally do without this if you don't have it. But I'll be using a little bit of that. Oh, and besides the sentiment, I am going to do a little bit of inking on some of my die cuts with the Pecan Pie. So I have a little sponge dauber here as well. Okay, and before I start die cutting, let's run through the papers and the sizes so that you know how much the sizes to cut each thing. Again, this is my card base crumb cake. It is 4 1/4 by 11, scored at 5 1/2 for a top fold card base. I have a scrap piece of crumb cake, a scrap piece of basic white. And then for my layering pieces, this is that Secret Sea with the little bronze flowers. This is cut, and my dimensions are a little strange, but I had a reason for doing this. I didn't want too big of a border. Let me actually show you that card again. I didn't want this to be a full 1/4 of an inch around here, and I didn't want it to be as small as 1/8 of an inch. So I cut this panel 3/16 of an inch, excuse me, smaller each direction than the base. So I'm going to list off the dimensions for you. So that Secret Sea piece, this is 4 1/8 by 5 5/16. Okay. This piece that's going to layer on top of that is 1 1/2 inches wide by 5 5/16. And then this piece is going to layer over the top of that. This is 3/4 of an inch by 5 5/16. So they're all the same height, 5 5/16. They're just a little bit different widths. Okay, I'm going to have all of this in my blog post this week, so you can go and refer to that to get all the dimensions, the printed, the printed dimensions and everything. And I'll also have a card template that you can print out and use on cards going forward. Okay, so let's do a little bit of die cutting here. I did a little bit ahead of time. I did cut a couple things out, which I'll show you, but I saved some of it for the actual card tutorial here. So I pulled in my mini Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine because everything I'm cutting today is small enough, but of course you could use any die cutting machine that you have. So I'm going to lay down my first plate and then one of my cutting plates. And the first thing I'm going to do, since I only have one thing to cut out of white, I just have a piece of basic white here, I am going to cut this shape for my sentiment. So I'm going to lay that on there with the blade down, put my top plate on, and crank it through. Okay. And then that's where I'm going to stamp my sentiment. I had cut the next size larger already out of crumb cake. So I'm going to layer those two together. And actually, let me show you, out of that set, they are the two smallest. I know it's kind of a mess in here. They're just kind of in the envelope, not stuck to that sticky anymore in the back. But you get a total of 6 shapes. And I use the two very smallest ones out of this beautifully celebrated set of these shapes. Okay. All right, let's cut the rest of our pieces now. I have some crumb cake. Actually, I'm going to cut this a little smaller so it fits through my machine. And we're going to be cutting several of the little branch, kind of the foliage, the little die pieces. So let me show you here. So this one cuts the flower and those little leaves, and then we have the little mini flowers. We need all 3 of those, and then I'm also cutting these and these 2 here. Okay. Okay, so let's get our little branches all onto the cardstock first. A lot of times I will use some low-tack tape so that doesn't happen, or so they don't shift as I'm rolling them through. I'm gonna try it without. They should be okay, since I'm not trying to keep this lined up with a stamped image. It's just cutting the cardstock itself. Okay, I'm gonna just kind of put a couple pieces up in there. Let's see here. All right, I also am going to be cutting, even though these cut out the images on that one piece of designer series paper, I'm also cutting just some plain crumb cake so that I can do a little bit of layering. So we'll lay those on there and put that top plate on and roll that through again. Okay. Good. Let's just set these aside. Okay, now some of these branches I will have to poke out of the die. So I'm going to grab some kind of a pokey tool here. Okay, so these are ready to go. Now I am going to go ahead and cut one more of this and one more of this size, because that's what I used in my final card. So I'll go ahead and do that off camera. All right, and then before I put my die cutting machine away, I am going to bring in this designer series paper and cut a couple more things out of this. I pre-cut one of the flowers, so that's kind of what we're going for. I'm going to do a blue one like this and then 3 small ones that will be cut with these smaller dies. So when you look at this paper, you really can cut anything out that you want, you know, as long as it's one of these flowers and these smaller flowers. But keep in mind, some of these that run off the edge, you're not going to get a full image. So, you know, if you wanted to fussy cut some of those out, you certainly could. I'm going to be looking for anything that's full like this. And since I want a blue one, I think that's the one I'm going to go for there. And then I do want, let's see here, I want 2 blues and a crumb cake. of the little ones. So I'll do a little searching here. Here's a blue one. I'm going to just use my scissors. Hope I didn't cut that too close. Cut that little piece out. So I cut them out just so that I have less paper to kind of deal with. And I always kind of feel bad cutting through some of these other parts, so I try to kind of cut close to the images that I'm going to be using. But I'm not really sure yet what I'll do with kind of the little scrap pieces that are around these. I don't know if they're salvageable or not, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. Okay. Set that to the side. Now I have my dies here. Let me grab my cutting plates again. Set that one down and that one. And this is where I will bring in some low tack tape because I don't want these dies shifting. So I'm going to just line up this die over the top of the flower. They're very easy to line up. And then I'm going to put a piece of tape just across like that. Set it on my plate. Let's grab. And actually, I'll do one of those little flowers at the same time, since I have two dies. That's the nice thing about this set. They included two dies, so you can do two at the same time. So let's get one of these lined up. And the nice thing about this is these flowers kind of have one petal that's kind of more rounded. It's like a little wider than the rest. And you can see in the die, there's also one like little petal piece that's wider. So that's the part that lines up with that wide petal, and then all the rest of them line up really nice too. So again, really easy to get lined up. So it's very tiny, but I'll get that lined up and put some tape on it. And I'm going to grab this back off of here just for a second. I think this tan one, I can fit the die on it. Let's see here. There we go. And I'll just add an extra little piece of tape just to be sure. Okay. And then put that plate on and crank it through. And then we'll just have one more little one to do. So let's peel this off and take a look. There we go. Very cute little flower. Okay. There's our blue one. And one more. And then I'm going to just cut this last little blue flower out. Okay, there's our little flowers. We have a few steps of prep work to do before we can start putting the card together. So the first thing I'm going to do is spray these tiny little foliage pieces with just a little bit of this Distress Mica spray. Again, of course, this is not a Stampin' Up! Product. If you don't have it, you can totally skip this. You could use like one of the Stampin' Blend markers and tap that onto these to get kind of a spray look with the Pecan Pie color. You could take some of the ink and kind of splatter it over them, or just leave them plain. They're really pretty just on their own. But I'm going to show you how I use this. And because these are so tiny, I don't want to spray much. I am going to grab, I have a box that I use, so excuse the condition of this box. I do a lot of splattering into it. So here is my little splatter box. I'll get that set up, and I'm going to put all these little pieces inside here. So hopefully this can contain the splatter, and I can then just move it off to the side while these dry. And I'm putting all 6 of these in here, although I only ended up using 5 in my final project. Now, if you haven't had these before, you do have to shake them. There's a ball inside. You'll see that kind of the the mica and the color basically all settles to the bottom. So I have already I already shook this to get it ready so that I wouldn't have to do that on camera. Now basically I'm gonna do a test spray to make sure nothing's clogged, and then I'm gonna hold this clear up here several inches away, maybe a foot at least, and just basically do one spritz and just kind of let the little droplets fall, and it's going to be very, very subtle. You're hardly going to see it, but it does add a nice little shimmer to these. So I'm going to just do a little, you can kind of see, I mean, if I sprayed up close, that would be way too much on these. So just you can kind of see how that looks. So I'm going to hold my hand clear up here by the camera. It's just off camera here, and do one spray. And I can see tiny little speckles. This one got a bigger spot on it, which is totally okay. But if you look up really close, you can see teeny tiny little speckles all over these. That's exactly what I want. I'm going to set this off to the side to dry. Okay, and then the next thing we're going to do is get our little flowers ready. And what I did with these is I'm going to zoom in just a tad so you can see these better. Took these tiny little flowers, and if you remember, we cut the crumb cake out of the same. Actually, before I do that, let's grab our Pecan Pie ink and our sponge dauber, and I did ink the edges of a lot of these different elements, so we'll be doing this a few different times. Let me show you how I did this. So a lot of times if I'm distressing something or adding ink to the edges, I'm just going to dab this in here. A lot of times I will hold my paper and I'll hold the sponge dauber almost parallel to each other and kind of, you know, brush off the edge like that, and I really get a lot more ink onto the front surface. I didn't want that much for any of this. I wanted it to be really subtle. So what I did was I held the sponge dauber at perpendicular basically to my cardstock and just kind of pushed the cardstock into the sponge. So it's squishing into it. You can see that. And so it's basically just getting that color on the very, very edge. It's kind of maybe a little hard to see. Just getting color on the edge, darkest right on the edge instead of up on the front surface. So I just went kind of around the whole thing. You can also kind of swipe like this if you want. Sometimes I feel like that might rough up your sponge dauber and make it kind of crumble a little bit easier. So I try to just kind of dab all the way around my pieces. Okay, so that's just kind of a demonstration of what I'm going to be doing here. Now these flowers, of course, are so teeny tiny, but this is what we're going to do. Just little tiny dabs around the edge just to add that little bit of interest. Okay, so we have each of our pieces here inked with that Pecan Pie. I'm going to set this aside. We'll need it one more time for the sentiment, but I'll come back to that in just a minute. And so let's go ahead now and get our little flowers ready. I want them to have a chance for the glue to dry. What I'm going to be doing with these, I'm going to layer them on top of the crumb cake, but I want to give each of these flowers just a little bit of texture and movement. I really like to have, you know, different pieces of my cards kind of raised up off, you know, so they're not all just flat. I think it adds some depth and dimension, some interest. So I have just a little piece of kind of foam. It's just spongy, and a stylus, something with just a rounded edge. You don't want a pointy edge. I'm not going to poke a hole. But I'm going to take each of these Designer Series paper flowers, not the bottom ones, just these ones that'll be on top, and I'm going to press into the center of them to kind of curl them up. So I'm going to just give, sorry if my hand's in the way, actually let me zoom in a little bit more first here. So I'm going to give it a real gentle press so that I see it kind of curling up, and see if I can hold that so you can see. It gives it some shape. It kind of curls it up into almost a little cup shape. So I'll do that with all three. Just gently press. Again, I don't want to poke a big hole in it or anything. And that just gives them each a little dimension, some shape, and then I'm going to glue them onto these crumb cake pieces. I think I'll grab the top flower and put some glue on that. Just a nice little dab and set that down. Use the stylus to kind of help hold it there. Now that it's rounded, it kind of likes to tip a little bit, but if you're careful with it, it kind of will balance there as the glue dries. And I'm not trying to line up the petals in a certain way. I'm just putting it down because I think that adds some interest to have, you know, have them not be perfect. Have that crumb cake piece showing behind it here and there. So, there we go. Okay, and I'm going to move these to the side and let them dry while we work on the next step. The next thing I'm going to do is get these flowers ready, and again, I like some depth and dimension, so what I did for these is I grabbed the flower, and the end where it has kind of the foliage pieces, I just used my thumb to kind of curl those up. I want those kind of coming up off my card. And then I'm going to glue the flower down to the crumb cake piece, but again, not completely square on top. I'm going to offset it just a little bit. So I'm going to just smear a little bit of glue back here, just on the flower, and we'll kind of offset that a little bit. And then under, hold that in place there while the glue dries. Underneath these two pieces of little foliage, I'm going to put a mini glue dot or a mini dimensional underneath each one, just so that as this kind of gets pressed down when it's maybe in an envelope or wherever, it isn't going to smash down completely. It'll kind of help hold that up a bit. And when I'm working with little spaces like that, I like to use something pokey, whether it's, you know, like a take your pick tool or my little tweezer. So I'm just going to grab one of those mini dimensionals and kind of sneak it back there. Get that one in, and that one right there. And just kind of lightly press those down. So there's one, and we'll do the same thing on the other one. And these two flowers are ready. Again, we'll let the glue dry. The next thing I'm going to do is stamp my sentiment. I'm using the Happy Birthday from the Boardwalk Fun stamp set and the Pecan Pie ink. And when I stamp this on, I'm using the very smallest die out of that Beautifully Celebrated set. Birthday is going to fit pretty much perfectly right through the middle. Now let's go ahead and get this stamped. Ink up my stamp and see if I can get this straight without getting my head in the way. So I am going to use some dimensionals and go ahead and pop that up on top of this crumb cake piece that we already cut out. I think I will just use a couple. And now we're going to assemble everything, and I'm just going to use some liquid glue for this. You could certainly use a tape runner. I am out of tape runner right now though, so glue it is. And whenever I'm gluing designer series paper, I like to just use a really thin bead because otherwise it really gets kind of, I don't know, it makes things kind of stiff. And anyway, I'm going to center this on my card panel, my base, and I'm gluing these first 3 pieces down flat. This one just goes top to bottom and centered left to right. And if you wanted to use a ruler and make sure you were getting exactly in the center, you can, but it's fairly easy. Oh, I was going to show you. I was originally going to use this as the next layer. And then when I turned it over, I just really kind of liked how that looked. It was maybe a little bit more subtle since we already have a lot of that shimmer in the back. I'll use that on a different card. So center this down the middle of that piece. Okay. And then if you need, you can put something heavy on top to help hold it all down. All right, and then I'm going to, I am going to glue this down flat, but I'm not going to put glue kind of through the middle because I want to be able to tuck some of the foliage under the top here. So I'm going to glue just kind of along the sides, a little on the bottom, and that should hold everything just fine. And I'm keeping it up maybe about an inch or so from the very bottom. And again, just centering it side to side. Okay. And then I'm going to put this flower down here, this one up here, and then these little ones will kind of be scattered, 1 on the bottom and 2 on the top. And what I'm going to do, because I want this flat on here, and this is already raised, I am going to add a mini dimensional just behind the leaf that's going to be hanging off the edge, and add a little bit of glue to this side. So again, the glue is going to touch on here, and I'm shifting it off to the left just a little bit. So the glue is touching the white panel there, and this dimensional that I put behind here is touching this back panel, and that keeps it all at the same level. So we'll do the same with that top blue flower. It's going to be this leaf that will be off. And let's see, this part needs some glue. And this one I'm shifting over to the right, just to give it some interest so that not everything is lined up straight up and down. It's nice to kind of have them, you know, shifted a little bit left and right. Okay, I am going to zoom in just a bit more then as we move on to these smaller pieces. Okay, and now for the little ones, I am going to glue them straight down. I'm going to put 1 blue one down here. And again, I want them to kind of feel a little bit scattered. So let's see, I think I'll use my tweezers and put a little dot of glue back here. And, you know, nothing has to be too precise. I'm kind of just, again, I want them to look scattered. So that one's going to go there. And you know what? Actually, before I do those two, I'm going to pause and put these other little foliage pieces in. That way I can kind of tuck these other 2 flowers in. So let's take a peek at what we have here. I don't think I'm going to use all of them. I think I'll probably use 5 of the 6. And how I put the other ones in is I just held my tweezers. Again, I mean, you can use your fingers, but I like to hang on to small things with tweezers. I feel like I have a little better control. I put just a little bit of glue on the end because I do want, again, some of that lift and dimension. And I'm going to just tuck this back behind here. And again, remember, I didn't put glue all over back there. So kind of just start tucking some of these back there. All right, and I'm going to try not to touch those too much as that glue continues to dry. I could probably stick this last one in there. Let's see. Yeah, I think I'm going to leave it off though. Okay, let's get these last two flowers tucked in then. So again, I'm going to just put a little dot of glue on the back. And I think I will put this one. Maybe I'll actually put it kind of on top of that one. And this blue one. I'm going to kind of tuck behind. There we go. Okay, we're almost done. The last finishing touch that I want to do is put a little bit of this metallic enamel effects in copper on here and kind of make it look like if you were to put some enamel dots on. I mean, that's basically the same effect. If you've not played with this before, I do encourage you to just to kind of play with it off to the side on a piece of scrap paper and see, you know, how is the control. You know, if you squeeze too much, you're going to get a really big blob. If you don't squeeze enough, you're hardly going to have anything. When I have played with these before, if you just, you know, kind of do your little dot, bring this straight up, it's going to have kind of a peak on the top of it. And if you leave it like that, it will dry, or it could dry with a pointy top. That's how I've had it happen before. So when I dab these on and get my little dots where I want them, I'm going to pick this up and kind of flick it. I'm not going to turn it over. I'm going to leave it up like this, but I'm going to flick it from the bottom. So this is what I'm going to be doing, kind of right under where those dots are, but I'm going to hold it nice and flat because I don't want my, you know, enamel effects to like move right or left. So I'm going to hold it like this, come underneath and tap it from the bottom, and that kind of helps settle down the enamel effects, so they'll kind of flatten out and just be a nice little round embellishment. So let's get started here. I'm going to put, I think, I'm going to bring in my little piece of scratch paper too, just in case. So let's do 3 little dots up here. We'll do 1 small one. The best thing is if you start to put it down and pull straight up. So a tiny squeeze, not too much. I want a little bit more here. And even a little bit more right here. Seems like I might have, oh, a little air in there, so. Okay, now I'm going to pick this up carefully and just kind of tap it from underneath. And that kind of helps them settle down just a little bit. Those all 3 kind of stayed small. I wanted one a little bit bigger, but that's okay. I'm going to try to sneak 2 more in right over here. Okay, and again, do the tapping. Okay, and then we're going to do 2 more down here. So a little bit bigger one here, and that there. Okay. Okay, and that's my card for today. I'm going to just be real careful as these enamel effects dry. They do take a little bit of time to dry, and I don't want to smear any of them. So I'm going to bring this up a little closer to the camera. Lots of shimmer and shine on this card. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, maybe picked up a few new little tips and tricks. You know, I don't use like the enamel effects very often and things like that. So, you know, maybe give that a try if you've not really used that before. I'll link everything and I'll put the product numbers down below. Again, a lot of this is going to be on the online exclusive starting in March. So if you're not a demonstrator or not planning on signing up in February, you'll have to wait till March, but I'll put that information down below so that you can order it as soon as it becomes available. And I'll list everything else down below as well, so that if you want to add any of these things to your craft room, you can certainly do that. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.